Deliberations. First budget tonight is the purchasing budget. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. The purchasing budget is on page 4 of the budget book. The fiscal year 2019 revised budget is $280,870. The proposed budget before you this evening is $285,815. That's an increase of $4,945. This is the 12th of 15 general government budgets. Mr. President, Raylene Bandini, the town's purchasing agent.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Council President.
Welcome back.
Members of the council, thank you, and the audience. I'd like to begin by just quickly explaining the increases for the 2020 budget in purchasing, where in the past we haven't had too many of them. But briefly, the equipment maintenance line of $2,000 does fund for the annual maintenance contracts for 23 copy machines that we have in and around Town Hall. Photocopy supplies of $1,000 funds for our color toners. And there are a few here in Town Hall. Advertising, I've added $1,000 to cover the building department's legal ads for bidding their projects. Last year we had 4, this year we had 2. And dues and subscriptions is up a little bit for a dues increase for my membership dues. That's about a 3% increase in the expense line. Next, I'd like to highlight 3 goals and objectives in the department that we're going to be expanding on in 2020. And the first is posting online. I know I've reported how we post online, but the focus in 2020 is really going to be working with Notify Me. Since we've noticed success in posting on Notify Me, that it's targeting more individuals than it is on the community as a whole. So that's going to be something we're going to be incorporating into our posting when we post on the web, also with Notify Me, and that'll become more routine. The second goal is to continue to assist with surplus property. Now, surplus property I've reported on that we do on smaller auctioning and surplusing, but the focus for 2020 will be to develop a surplus property policy. This policy is really looking into the future to be in place to help with the school department disposing of their equipment once they rebuild their schools and they bring on new equipment. There'll be a policy for them to refer to dispose of those goods. And lastly, the purchasing department will continue to work with the departments on all of their capital projects, and most specifically address the 29 conceptual recommendations for capital improvements. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Councilor Palumbo.
Again, I just want to appreciate you for your, I've been finding the announcements of your postings very, very useful, particularly this season when we were doing so many road projects. So I just wanted to, again, acknowledge that and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate that you mentioned getting a policy for surplus at the schools. You probably wanted to add, should have added some more money for photocopying, because the building committee is going to keep you busy too. Mr. Manager.
Already built in.
Thank you very much for your presentation tonight.
You're very welcome.
The next budget we have now, tonight, is Town Hall maintenance. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. The town hall maintenance budget is on page 13 of your budget book. The fiscal year 2019 budget is $337,538. Proposed budget before you this evening is $346,016, which is an increase of $8,478. This is the 13th to 15 general government budgets. I call your attention to a couple of account numbers. The account number 211 and 213, the utilities, electricity and gas respectively. As we've talked about with all the town buildings, one of the assumptions for paying for the debt cost for the ESCO project is an increase of those automatically at 3% each year. And I also call your attention to two account numbers. Account number 241, building and maintenance, is going down by $10,000, and then building maintenance supplies is going up, account number 430, by $13,375. Both of those are related to the Director of Public Buildings, Ms. Cable, who's going to speak momentarily about more of the maintenance projects being done with in-house staff and less reliance on outside contractors. So those, one going down by $10,000 and then providing a lot more maintenance supplies for in-house staff to do that. So at this point, Mr. President, members of the council, the fiscal year 2020 Town Hall maintenance budget is $346,016. Mr. President, Ms. Cable, the Director of Public Buildings.
Welcome.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having me. As Mr. Driscoll said, we do have a reduction and we do have an increase, and it really is based on the work that we plan on doing, and now that the Public Buildings has taken maintenance over for this. So right now, we had an increase in the actual maintenance, which is really contractor work. We are hoping to do most of that work, or a lot of that work, with in-house, but because we're doing it in-house, it falls on the supplies. And just so that everybody knows, what we did is, there's still a lot of unknowns. There is a lot of maintenance that we haven't done in this building in a long time. So I took an average of the square foot of maintenance that I had spent on the schools, and I pretty much multiplied that, but the square footage here to kind of round out with the number. So it's about 72 cents a square foot for the building maintenance, and about 61 cents a square foot for the supplies, and that's where I came up with these numbers. Really, this next year is going to be a test to where we go with that. I have a couple of goals that we would like to do for the town hall. We started our preventative maintenance program. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next briefing, but we definitely want to beef that up. And one of the things that we noticed right away is there's panic buttons in this building. And when we went around to test those, a lot of people didn't know where they were. So we're going to start doing some PM on little things like that. A lot of times people don't think about that, but it's very important. So we're going to start a whole program on that. I recently, in the last 2 weeks, I took an asbestos baseline test in this building. No one really wants to talk about that, but we're going to have some employees in here working a lot, and it's just a good idea to know where it's at. We should have had one, but we don't know where that's at, so we'll start with the baseline, and then I have a feeling that there's probably going to be some encapsulation that we're going to do. I will not know that until we get that report, but I do have a feeling that will be coming up, and we'll make sure that all that notice is out and publicized when we do get that. Our boiler room needs a little bit of cleanup, and we've got a chiller that is about 23 years old that we need to start planning for that. That will probably not happen next year, but we need to start planning for that to happen in the next year so that you guys can have AC in this room. And then we've been talking about new carpet in this area for a very long time. We've cleaned these, but I think it's really time that we put that plan to really paper and start figuring out how we're going to get some new carpet in this building without disrupting a lot of the stuff that's happening. So that is all that I have on Town Hall.
Questions from the council? Councilor Feltner.
Thank you. Do you anticipate, I noticed the ceiling, like, are there specific projects you want to touch on? Is it just a catch-all as far as things you notice that maybe need attention sooner than later?
So I don't think there's anything that is an emergency that's in this building right now. But what I really need to do, and what I haven't done yet, is I really need to sit down and go through what the capital plan was that was planned out in the last 5 years, sit down with that, figure out, is this the right plan, really go through all of our facility assessments that we've had done. GNEB had a good one done 2 years ago, and really figure that out so that we can plan that, and we can start doing capital plans next year early so that we can figure that out. But right now, I don't think there's any emergency that we need to do.
And is it include furniture in this chamber, or is when you say buildings, do we look at?
So my department right now doesn't really manage the furniture, but definitely we'll work with anybody that is managing that to make sure that we link up together.
Thank you.
Councilor Palumbo.
Just a quick, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick, what is an example of preventive maintenance programs, and what is a panic button testing?
So If you allow me, I'll talk a little bit about the preventative maintenance,
In the next one?
preventative maintenance in our next briefing. I actually have some pictures to show you, so we'll talk about that. But the panic button is, there's a few panic buttons that people have. They're like car garage openers, or garage door openers. And they are in their desks. If there's any in need, they push the buttons and the cops will come.
Oh, I
So
see.
they're those panic buttons, but they do not work if you don't know where they're at, right? And so if we don't test that, if we don't do that, so that is just an example of some of the things that we're going to try and make sure that we always know where that is. So all that facility stuff that's related to that is
You have one
is
here?
working.
I can't divulge that. Are there any other questions or comments? I have one. I want to put my 2 cents in about the outside wall in the council office. That's kind of embarrassing when we have other people coming in, so please add that to your list.
That is on my priority.
Thank you.
I am waiting for a report.
Thank you.
Before we move forward with that.
Councilor Falcoff.
Well, I wouldn't have asked about panic buttons if you hadn't brought it up, but how, if you don't know where they are, how do you find them?
Good question. Well, we did end up finding most of them, so we just have to replace them. And so there's just a grid, and we'll just replace them like any other car garage openers. But if we don't practice things like that, then when we need them, we won't have them.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, the next budget is the Public Buildings Department.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Again, Ms. Cable and Mr. Lewis can stay right where they're at. The public buildings budget is on page 15 of the budget book. The fiscal year 2019 budget is $297,000. The proposed budget before you this evening for the Department of Public Buildings is $477,429. That's an increase of $180,429. This is the 14th of 15 general government budgets. Just wanted to, prior to formally reintroducing Ms. Cable, wanted to provide for folks here and at home the background on the Department of Public Buildings. As you recall, Mr. President, back in fiscal year 2018, Budget Policy Guideline 2J read as follows: continued discussion with the school department on consolidating town and school facilities maintenance departments into a single town department in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 71, Section 37M. Back in September of 2017, Dr. Galston and myself appointed Ms. Cable to the new position of Director of Public Buildings. The Town Council's Budget Policy Guideline in fiscal year 19 read as follows, which is finalize the structure and the role of the new school town facilities director with the school department for consolidating town and school facility maintenance departments into a single town department. The fiscal year 2019 budget, so the current budget we have, included funding of the Department of Public Buildings, and the recommended appropriation was $297,000. The following were the proposed positions in the department for fiscal year 2019. First one was a facilities assistant, which 50% of the funding would be in the school department and the 50% would be in the school department of public buildings. An energy manager, maintenance supervisor, a supervisor of custodians, a preventive maintenance technician, and a carpenter. A memorandum agreement between the Honorable School Committee and the Honorable Town Council agreeing to the creation of a joint municipal and school facilities department was executed in July of 2018. In accordance with the fiscal year 20 budget policy guideline, the structure and the performance of the new public building department will be reviewed and monitored during this fiscal year. The fiscal year 2020 school budget and various other town departments includes funding related to the Department of Public Buildings. Discussions will continue on how best to proceed in merging these related funds from other departments into the Department of Public Buildings. So I just want to call your attention to one item, account number 111, as indicated on page 50 of the budget book. There is a recommendation to add a position in the Department of Public Buildings for fiscal year 2020. That position would be a general maintenance helper. The dollar amount appropriation would be $50,432, and that is recommended this evening. So, Mr. President, members of the Town Council, the fiscal year 2020 Department of Public Buildings appropriation is $477,429. Mr. President, Ms. Cable.
Thank you. All right, so last year, I threw up this mission statement, and really just want to highlight that we're developing, maintaining, cleaning, and making sure that the facilities are up to the standards that we want them to be. What you see in the light blue color are all of the buildings that right now we're doing maintenance on. In the dark blue are all the buildings that I'm hoping to pick up next year to do maintenance on. And they are in the order that I would like to do that, but there's still an approval that we need with Mr. Driscoll to make sure those are the right things. But I'm hoping to start doing maintenance on the senior center any day now, and then the library quickly after that. This is my staffing chart. It's what you can see right now is the blue is what had currently been in place prior to me getting here. Some of the names have changed, but at least the position was here. The shaded yellow are positions that were a part of either the town or school that has merged into the new department. The bright yellow are the new positions that were funded last year, and the green are the ones that we're hoping to fund in the future. You'll see in the middle column at the bottom is that general maintenance helper that Mr. Driscoll just briefed today about. That was what we're looking to fund. And then you'll see there's two other positions. One is the maintenance foreman, and then a brand new one that I've added, and I have not even discussed this with Mr. Driscoll or Mr. Tracy yet, but I thought it was important is that we have somebody that really runs our environmental controls and can program that. When we bring these new schools on board, the amount of programming that is going to take in order to manage it, to make sure that there's enough AC in the auditoriums when there's details, and that there's not when there's not details, really is a full-time job, and it needs some programming. Right now, Mr. Lewis does a lot of that, but it really is turning things up and turning things down. If it really has to get in the meat, we have to bring in Johnson's Control. So I think this is going to be someone that is value added, not for next year, but certainly in the future, probably in the years to come. One of the quick things that I'd like to point out is this total, to include those 3 extra people, is 38 people. In this last year, I've advertised for 11 positions, and 3 of those I had to advertise 2 to 3 times. So it has been a lot of work kind of getting this, but I also remind you that when I came in, I had 2 maintenance people on my staff, and then I went down to 1. So for 4 months, I was down to just 1 maintenance staff, and right now we're building that up and have all the support with me. So I thank you for giving me this support, and hope that you will continue to do so. These are our accomplishments that I showed you guys, showed you last year, and I just wanted to highlight this is really what I've done. So I still look at these philosophies and make sure that I'm following in everything that we do. We are putting things in our maintenance direct. We are prioritizing. We're doing weekly prioritization. We're sitting down every morning and making sure if there is something that comes up that is more of an emergency or more important, that we're handling that right away. We are doing preventative maintenance. So if you just give me a second to talk about this, these are the pictures of what we're doing. So what you see on your left side is old things, and the right side is the changes. So that top is a water filter. So what we had not done in the past is, well, what we had done in the past, we're very reactive. If something was breaking, we're going to fix it. But what we hadn't been doing is really going in and preventing things from breaking, prolonging that life of that equipment. Now that you had approved a preventative maintenance tax, which really is something that other towns are really asking me how that we got that done, and they want that. This is something that Watertown has kind of started. This is going to save us a lot of money in the future because we are cleaning things. We are making sure that things are running. That bottom one is a belt. The belt has not been changed in forever, and because it's starting to fall apart, that equipment isn't running properly. You want to know why things aren't? Your AC isn't working, your heat isn't working. It's because we're not cleaning those vents, which you see on the right. This is a good news story. These pictures are kind of not really good, but we are fixing this now. So this is something that our budget had, that we used our budget for last year, and it's going to save us a lot of money. And in all that, in 1 year's time, we've completed about 1,595 work orders. All these work orders are not equal. Some take us, a few hours, some take a few days, but this is a good accomplishment, and now that we have established this, we'll be able to figure out, okay, what is next year? Are we staying at the right lake? This will help me decide, do we need that extra foreman? Do we need these extra people to kind of help and make sure that we maintain? All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lewis to talk about energy.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Honorable Town Council. I'd like to give you a very brief overview of ongoing goals that we've spoke about in the past, and then focus mostly on goals and objectives going forward. Our green community requirements, when we signed up for this in fiscal year 10, we did agree to a 20% reduction, targeting a 20% reduction in our municipal energy use. We are currently at 18.5% weather normalized, so that's getting there. We also agreed to a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per the state requirements. And that, we have a little better story. In fiscal year 2016, we actually exceeded that, so that our greenhouse gas emissions is down about 1,400 tons of CO2 annually, just from the reduction in the municipal energy. That number is larger than the energy number because different forms of energy have different greenhouse gas impacts. Additionally, other things, last year, the Honorable Town Council did the stretch goals to commit to a transition to 100% renewable energy. I was asked to report on that. From the municipal side, the stretch goal is 100% renewable energy for electricity, 2035. Baseline in FY18, we are at 17% renewable. 16.5% renewable. That was the 12% in our energy supply. And actually, first time ever, I did the calculations of what our 3 solar arrays, DPW, high school, and the police station, actually contribute to our municipal energy. And that's about 4.5% last year. So that's we need to grow that, but that's an impressive number, and first time I had done that math. Currently, we're at 18.5% renewables because the supply went up, and I'm assuming our solar production will be about the same of last year. Additionally, on that proclamation, there was 100% renewable energy for heating and transportation by 2050. Here we're starting out with a lot of headroom to go forward on. Additionally, with that, the town encouraged the transition to 100% renewable for non-municipal, for our residents, and by 2050. That baseline, FY18, is about 12% from the energy supply. We do have almost 3 gigawatt of solar installed in town, which is pretty impressive at a town this size. However, I don't have the full numbers yet on knowing what percentage of that is the renewable energy for the town. When we do get into the Watertown electricity choice and in the community choice aggregation, we'll be getting detailed information on that, and I'll be able to report further. The ESCO, the Johnson Control Performance Contract that we agreed to multiple years ago, we went through our first full year of measurement and verification where they have to actually prove to us that they are saving us the money that their guaranteed contract says. This is an in-depth view where Johnson Controls comes in, goes through utility bills, goes through operations, looks at the plants. I spent a fair amount of time with them. But for first year, their contracted savings, guaranteed savings was $473K, and they came up with a verifiable $491. So they are on track for meeting their goals. So going forward, for FY20 energy manager goals, reducing our weather normalized energy use, another percent and 1.4%, because I have a solid plan for that. I'm really shooting for 1.5, so we can get to that 20% reduction. That also includes the associated reduction in greenhouse gases. And one thing that's to be determined, but did some real early calculations on the schools. We're going to make such a great, it appears on the path that we're on right now, we're going to make such great strides in reducing our energy utilization at these schools, where we'll have the new schools and also the upgraded, and the energy is just going to be orders of magnitude lower with better environment. It's just really encouraging. The Green Community Grants, we've got a track record of 3 of them now. FY16 was the street lights. I told you it would be a little over $100,000 in savings. It turned out to be $92,000. We ended up with more non-functioning lights replaced than expected. Even if they're highly efficient, it turns out when you replace one that's off with one that works, you do use a little more energy. We're also working through a couple of Eversource billing anomalies. Our FY18 competitive grants, which we're in process right now, that included a lot of LED upgrades for some library lighting. The biggest one was at the DPW, a very good project that's been completed. And we just recently finished the municipal lots behind the library and behind CVS. Those are exciting because the new codes require new control technology. So for parking lot lighting, you have to have proximity sensors. So those lights are set now to be full on at dusk, and then they actually cut down a wee bit at midnight, and then they'll cut down even more. However, if somebody drives in 30 yards car, they'll pop back up to full intensity. If somebody walks in at about 20 yards, they'll start to go back up to intensity. Full intensity. I've not received much feedback on it. I did speak with one police officer, and his first cut was that he loved them because he can just drive by and see if the lights are on, somebody's in there. If they're not, somebody's not. We are also looking for FY20 competitive grants. We've been pretty successful in getting the full amount of about $250,000 for each grant cycle. I plan to go forward and look for competitive grants in FY20. One of the pieces on this, when talking about the grants, we wanted to really make sure that we're hitting the right places. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has been plucked for energy savings, which is good, but now we have to be smarter about where we target our efforts. And in doing that, and Director Cable had me go through a deep dive of the building energy utilization. And this is actually an energy use per square foot per occupied hour, so that we can sort of normalize out. You know, the fire stations are open 24/7 as a police station, whereas some of the schools are lesser, but we really wanted to see what these buildings were actually using. Good point is, a couple of the schools that we're in the process of replacing have been on the higher end of the scale, and this also helps us to target other areas for not only green community grants, but budget items going forward. Also on the data deep dive, we've been working with Johnson Controls. We went through the ESCO verification, but with that, we have such a great bunch of data on that, on how the buildings are actually operating. We're able to get into that and to start to tighten up the operation. A real quick example, we can actually look at where we have the controls, individual offices and rooms, see how long it takes to come up to temperature or down to temperature, and then have the schedule adjust accordingly. So that's still to be tested, but I think there's some good savings there that doesn't cost anything. And as I said, we're looking at the high usage buildings. Another area that we've jumped into recently is really taking a little better and analyzing the town's utility bills. And this was brought about a couple of reasons. One is that there are some companies that are pitching these services, but we had in-house expertise to do it. Also, Director Brothers from the hockey rink came to me with a bill that was about $10,000 higher than it should have been. So Eagle-eyed Dan caught that and wanted to dug into. And with as little as, 17 phone calls to Eversource, we were able to sort that one out. And actually, they did agree that it was a mistake on the bill, and they did reverse the charge. So we're looking, I'm looking at the school bills now, and we'll be, as we pick up buildings, be continuing to do that. Bigger picture items, the master plans. You know, ultimately, we want to get to the full climate action and energy master plan. There's a couple of cornerstones that need to be done before that, and that includes the town-wide greenhouse gas inventory and the vulnerability assessment. We have actually applied for a grant for a municipal vulnerability assessment. That is in process. In addition to that grant, we also asked for money for the greenhouse gas inventory. I feel very confident that we'll get the vulnerability grant, and it's a little less confident right now on the money for the greenhouse gas emissions. But doing the vulnerability assessment is a great first step and a cornerstone for the entire climate action and energy plan, ultimately rolling up to the comprehensive plan. Watertown Electricity Choice, our long-awaited residential aggregation. This is actually getting closer, and in the very near future, will, I think, be appearing before you with some more details. This has been a very long time coming through Department of Public Utilities authorization. This is a highly state-vetted program, and everything takes a while. Starting to dive into the transportation a little bit more. As you probably heard from the DPW, they did add 2 EVs this year, which was very exciting. And we really want to make sure that we understand what impact that has, and also help to work to deploy more EVs, both with charging infrastructure and analyzing other opportunities. There's getting to be a lot more municipal work in the heavy truck and pickup trucks, more utility-type vehicles that are either plug-in hybrids or also full EVs. And lastly, just staying engaged and monitoring the success of two really exciting items. Bringing the lead standards up to town-wide silver, I think it's going to have a big impact on the building, and our solar requirements ordinance, which you passed last year. We've gotten a lot of press, a lot of discussion, a lot of questions about it, and I think we're going to be soon having our first building coming actually through site plan review that is affected by that. And so far, we've had very positive responses. Thank you.
All right, so the strategic development plan, this was a slide that I showed you last year on the development of this new department. That red line shows where we're at, which means everything to the left should be green if we were exactly on schedule according to Lori Cable's plan. We're actually doing pretty good, but we're not exactly there. So what I did is I kind of created a new strategic plan, kind of based on where we're at, which pretty much lines up the buildings that I've showed you before, taking over the senior center, the library as far as maintenance goes, still working with the schools, working with all the other towns and going forward. So this is the plan that we now sit down monthly with the school administration as well as some of the town administration and figure out and make sure that this department is still moving forward at the speed that is appropriate to make sure everything is done right. Some budget adds. As we talked about, we are hoping to add one more maintenance helper that would bring my maintenance team up to 6, which is a pretty good number right now, and one that we'll be evaluating over and over again as we start doing more maintenance in the town. Our contracted services, we have added a few extra dollars there, and that is because we looked at some of the capital plan items that we'd probably be doing and moved a lot of it over to our operating budget, so that line item went up a little bit more. The simple budget adds, we got more people, we got telephone, we got supplies that has always been coming out of the school that we're going to try and put some of that into the Department of Public Buildings line items where it should be. And then a couple of capital plan items that we can use in the future for not only the schools, but as we take up the town as we see needed. And then in that box is that goal of mine that eventually all of those maintenance and custodial line items in the public building budgets right now will come eventually into mine, so that it will be a little bit easier to manage on my part, and we can really look at things from apples to apples. So these are my goals. A lot of them are the same. The ones on top are really what I'm focusing on. We're going to continue developing this department. We're going to maintain these buildings. We're going to start inventorying our supplies. This is one of the things that I was hoping to get started, but haven't really done that. Not only our equipment, but all of the supplies so we can move forward. For example, the custodial supplies here in this building still use bleach. We don't use bleach in the school, so let's get all on the same page so that if ever there is some cross when someone is out sick, everyone knows the same products. Ensuring our budget meets the right things, working with the unions. That is a big thing that will be happening in the summer to merge a few areas because of this new department. I'd also like to start an educational program. I've got 2 pictures up there. You're probably wondering, hey, what is she talking about? Maybe recycling, maybe, trash. Maybe these pictures are up there because you shouldn't be putting door stops in a toilet or flushing this down a toilet. So I think there's ways that the department can maybe someday, get with the teachers and have some of these educational programs, especially now that we have the new schools. I know you've heard about the contractors and the architects talking about this as things are happening, but we don't need to wait for them. We can start doing it because we have that in-house. We can start putting out flyers. Don't turn your AC down to 60 because you're going to freeze it and then it's going to pop and it's going to burst and then you're not going to have AC. Little things like that I think we can start getting out in either a newsletter or using Dr. Galston's website in order to do that. And that concludes my briefing. What questions you have for us?
Thank you. Questions from the council? Councilor Canellis.
Thank you for the presentation. To Mr. Lewis, regarding the street lighting and the LED fixtures, I had inquired of Mr. Me on Saturday as to the maintenance of the new LEDs, and he said that there were issues with the sensors. So is that something that can be looked at? I don't know why the sensors are failing more than the LED light fixtures.
I am not aware of that. I will follow up with Mr. Me to find out what he's talking about.
Okay, thank you so much.
Counselor Feltner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for your presentation. It's very exciting to see all the new initiatives, and your enthusiasm is really welcome around preventive maintenance as well. I'm wondering, Mr. Lewis, on the street lights, are all of them same generation, or are the one, like the first ones that were installed, are we just waiting till they die out, or?
Yeah, currently, we have about 2,400 street lights. 1,000 of them, actually 936, are current generation roadway street lights we replaced in the last couple of years. Previous to that, in 2012, there was a street light project, also with Green Community Grant. Those are older generations, but those are still LEDs. The LEDs have about a 25-year life, so that we really haven't seen many failures. We have seen a couple on the older street lights, which we have 1,200 of. On those, when they do fail, we replace them with the current generation.
Thank you. And then just a question to Ms. Cable. The maintenance, like the library, and you're talking about building maintenance, does that include, does the landscaping or bike racks, or is that more DPW? Are you still working out who does what on that kind of?
Yeah, right now, the town's landscaping contract falls under DPW, and we have a small piece for that, but the main contract falls under them. There's still some tweaks that we need to do, and I'm working with DPW to make sure that we either add some alternates or we get in there. So it's kind of, they're the lead, but we're working together with them.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Falcoff.
Yeah, so what's with these Eversource bills that are anomalies?
Streetlights are a complicated animal. They either are metered where it has a meter such as, you have in your house and there's a string of them, or else they do them as, they count them, they say, okay, you got 47 streetlights that are, 50 watts apiece, and just bill us on that, assuming a certain hourly rate of use and so many lights. Those have to all be transitioned over every time we do a new street light. So we went through the recent upgrade and went through those, and we're still debating with Eversource on a couple of the metered ones.
And that accounts for the skating rink issue? The $10,000 mistake?
Oh, I'm sorry. Those are totally separate issues. That one was a power factor adjustment, which is a power factor adjustment that was an issue, that was supposed to be an issue. They have a really big chiller in there for the ice. So it was possible that they had it, but once we dove in with the technical people, they backed off on that. So those are two very separate things, but same supplier.
Do you trust them?
I think trust but verify is a good way to go.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other comments? Counselor Palumbo.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was just so detailed. I was a little lost on it, but I really appreciate all the work both of you are doing. Thank you. I'm looking at the book that we get in the positions. Are you saying there's an additional position that's not listed here that to be hired?
So, for next year,
Yeah,
we are
for the-
only
for
asking for
22.
one additional one.
Okay, and I don't, that is not, okay, so there's, what I don't see here is the position that you're asking for, that's all. Maybe I should just ask it later on.
The general maintenance position is the one that we're asking for this year.
That's the new one.
That is the new one, yes. There are two other ones that I will be asking for in the future, but only one for next
Yeah,
year.
but for the fiscal year that we're talking about, 2020, which
Right.
this budget is for, 2020, right?
Yes.
There should be in here then the position that you're looking for to hire, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't see that, so,
What?
It's not vacant in there.
No, additional funding.
Tom or Mr. Manager, can you help?
Counselor, to your request, if you're looking at the comp sheet, new positions are not on the comp sheet. They're in an additional funding request. And then which is a separate form. Departments who request additional funding will put it on that form, and then it goes on a separate column on the, what I call the cover sheet, which is the page that we're looking at. And it's in the additional funding request column, and then eventually gets into managers recommends if the manager so decides to move it forward to the Honorable Town Council.
Okay. Fine.
Can I ask one question? I think to Mr. Lewis, back with streetlights, and when you mentioned that the meters were on the lighting boxes for the streetlights for Arsenal Street and Mount Auburn Street. I was driving on Arsenal Street at 5:30 yesterday, and all the streetlights were on because they're still on mechanical timers. Have you thought about changing the timers to just photo cells on those streetlight control boxes on Arsenal Street and Mount Auburn Street, so we don't have lights on during the day when the sun's shining?
It sounds like a great plan for next year. Yes, those are you're talking about the ornamental ones?
Yes.
Yeah, I will look into that.
Because I think that would just, and it would also save the labor of having somebody go out every month and change the timers to a different time. So just something on the to-do list.
Anyone else? Thank you, Laurie and Ed, for your presentation and your objectives. The next budget we have this evening is the education budget. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. President. While the school committee chairman and the superintendent of schools get set up, I would provide offer some remarks in advance of tonight's school department fiscal year 2020 education appropriation. My remarks are all on pages 78 to 81 of the budget message. As you know, Mr. President and members of the council, two of the top priorities of the program enhancements expenditure section, Town Council's fiscal year 2020 budget policy guideline reads as follows. 2A is to continue to develop Building for the Future initiative funding in collaboration with the School Building Committee for the 3 elementary school project by formalizing the proposal to use funds redirected from the retirement appropriation when the pension fund is fully funded while also paying down the OPEB liability, and for the MSBA high school project with the proposed debt exclusion funding. Item 2C, the budget policy guideline is to continue to work collaboratively with the Watertown Public Schools to develop a comprehensive 5-year education budget that assures sustainable funding for our schools and the successful education of our children. Dr. Galston, Superintendent of Schools, had presented the fiscal year 2020 Superintendent's recommended budget at the April 1st, 2019 meeting. The 162-page document can be viewed on the Watertown Public Schools website. On April 5, the Honorable School Committee unanimously adopted the fiscal year 2020 Superintendent's recommended budget. The submitted fiscal year 2020 school health insurance appropriation is $5,202,813, which is an increase of a little over $305,000 above the fiscal year 2019 level. Included within the school health insurance appropriation are monies related to projected staffing in fiscal year 2020. The submitted fiscal year 2020 budget before you tonight continues the town's very strong commitment to education. The recommended funding level before you tonight for fiscal year 2020 is $50,441,424, which is the Honorable School Committee's adopted budget, and an increase of $2,401,973 above the fiscal year 19 appropriation. Police Department will continue placing a school resources officer at the high school and middle school for the 2019 to 20 school year. As just mentioned during the Department of Public Building presentation, memorandum agreement was executed back in July of 18 between the Honorable School Committee and the Honorable Town Council, agreeing to the creation of a joint municipal and school facilities department. Additionally, as we discussed, there are monies within the school budget and various other town departments related to the Department of Public Buildings, and discussions will continue on how best to proceed merging those related funds from other departments in the Department of Public Buildings. With respect to school capital projects, the fiscal year 20 to 24 capital improvement program includes funding of various school improvements totaling $354.2 million over the next 5 years. The categories, 8 categories are listed on page 6 of the PowerPoint. The school capital projects are listed for fiscal year 20, total $38,782,500. Clearly, the two key ones are the 3 elementary school project at $35 million and the high school building project at $2.5 million. With respect to Building for the Future initiative, the Honorable Town Council's fiscal year 20 to 24 capital improvement program conceptual recommendation reads in part as follows: concur with the decision to proceed with the Building for the Future initiative of $170 million for the 3 elementary school project funding within the confines of Proposition 2.5. As a follow-up to that conceptual recommendation, in accordance with the Town Council's fiscal year 2020 Budget Policy Guideline 2A, borrowing of the $170 million within the confines of 2.5 will occur beginning in fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 2023. And in fiscal year 20, it'll be $35 million. We've also outlined the debt service for the 3 elementary school project beginning the first 4 years of the project beginning this year with a little shy of $1 million. As you know, a school building committee was established in March of 2018 with the 13 appointments to the committee being made, including the Honorable Town Council President Mark Sideris, Town Council Vice President Vincent Picciarelli, School Committee Chairman John Ports, School Committee Member Lindsay Mosca, and the committee is the representative of the town in all dealings with the architect. And then lastly, with respect to the town's strong commitment to education, is further evidenced by the chart on page 21 of the fiscal year 2020 budget message, which shows the education appropriation increased by almost $18.6 million from fiscal year 2009, some 11 fiscal years ago, which is a 15.39 increase over that time frame, or an annual average increase of 5.31%. And then lastly, the expenditure forecast included in the submitted fiscal year 2020 budget has departmental expenditures projected to increase 2.5% annually from fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2023. The education appropriation is projected to increase 5% annually from fiscal year 2021 through 2023. And then lastly, we look forward to continue working collaboratively with the Watertown Public Schools to develop a comprehensive multi-year education budget that assures sustainable funding for our schools and the successful education of our children. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Dr. Gosselin?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I'll start off. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you for this opportunity for us to present our school budget. Let me start by thanking the people to my right here, the superintendent and Heidi Perkins, the Director for Finance and Operations, for all the work that they did in putting this document together. It's a tremendous amount of work. It's probably the one thing that occupies most of their time, or a good chunk of their time, during the last several months. So thank them, and then also want to thank Kendra Foley and Lindsay Mosca. Kendra is the chair for the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, and then Lindsay is another member. But most importantly, thank you, the Town Council and the Town Manager, for the continuing support that you provide for education in this community. It's really incredible. The last several years, the Great Recession of 10 years or so ago was a difficult time for everybody, and since that time, I think you've stepped up to the plate in a whole variety of ways with the manager and the council in providing the support so that we can maintain class sizes, that we can do programs like the elementary foreign language program, the engineering program. This next year, we're going to expand the instructional coaches into the middle school. So you're going to hear a variety of the initiatives, some maintaining some things and adding a few new things that are really important for the schools. And it's all a credit to the support that we get from you and the broader community. So again, thank you very much. So we'll walk through the slides here. I'm going to do a few of them, and Dr. Gosselin will do some. We'll kind of trade off a little bit. I give her the hard ones that have all the numbers in it, and I do the words. So that's kind of the way we operate here. If you go to just our mission statement, Watertown Public Schools prepares all students for life by engaging them in a challenging and meaningful education with an inclusive, diverse community. In our vision statement, inspiring excellence for all, Watertown Public Schools inspires all to explore and shape the world around them, and the core values of equity, excellence, and community. And so this drives our budget. You'll see again, particularly the references to the core values. You'll see those throughout the document. It's very important. Just a couple of kind of outcomes at the very beginning, high school student outcomes, some typical measures that are often used, SAT outcomes. You can see this is the class of 2018 test takers and their scores in reading and math. Advanced placement tests, that's another often typical outcome that's used here. Again, 2018. We have a pretty high participation and very high success rate. Percentage of students scoring 3 and above is 74%. That's in the top 25% of high schools in the state. We're in that category. Next to that, you can see the plans of graduates, Watertown High School graduates from 2018. And you can see most 78.7% for four-year colleges, two-year colleges, et cetera. On the next slide, you have to peer close here. It's small print. But these are all the schools where Watertown graduates from 2018, last year, where they were accepted, the two-year and four-year schools. So you can look through, it's quite a list. I think it's a broad range of colleges and universities. Next are a few more accomplishments. AP Scholars. We have 5 AP Scholars, 5 with honors, 9 Scholars with distinction, and 1 National AP Scholar. National Merit Letters of Commendation, 2. The Adams Scholarship, which I believe covers tuition, I think is what it's, at state schools. So 28% of graduating seniors qualified for that. And you can see 2% attending 2 or 4-year college or technical, 93%, which is up just a little bit from the previous year. Let me turn it over to Dr. Galston for the next couple of slides.
Excellent. So I always think it's important to ground the discussion around the budget in terms of those outcomes that we have for our students. It's one of the greatest joys of being in education is seeing the kindergartners and their progression all the way through graduation, which will happen shortly for our class of 2019. But just to see those amazing outcomes and just how it is we're preparing our students for their lives that lay ahead, and we're just very proud of what our students accomplished. So in terms of our FY19 accomplishments, just a brief overview. You've heard about our district, our mission and our vision, and we've developed a 4-year district improvement strategy, which will guide not just the budget process, but all that we do. We're well into our first year and moving into the next 3. So we are continuing the use of technology to support our school system. We completed the eligibility module for the MSBA. Right now, actually, we're headed into the feasibility study for the high school, so very excited about that. Another major accomplishment was the later start times at Watertown Middle School and Watertown High School, and that had some budgetary implications for FY19. We had a mention from our Department of Public Buildings Director about our new website, so if you haven't had a chance to peruse it, it's quite lovely. And then we've had successful hiring of key administrative positions, one of them being our Director of Finance and Operations to the right of me, Heidi Perkins. So then we have major FY19 K-12 teaching and learning accomplishments. A lot of this has to do with trying to bring consistency and coherence to our curriculum and making sure we're meeting the needs of all of our students, either through diagnostic assessment or ensuring that our curriculum is aligned, providing professional development for teachers, working together as a leadership team. And then more specifically, we have at the elementary and the secondary level several initiatives in place that are just supporting our students and helping them to be successful. One thing that we did this past year was universal PSATs for all of our sophomores and juniors. I do believe that that's an excellent way to provide our students with an understanding of what it takes, in essence, to be in that 93% of students that are moving on. But we continue with our FLES program, our foreign language in the elementary schools, which was mentioned, our implementation of balanced literacy, K-5, our responsive classroom initiative for social emotional learning, and more and more and more. But the point is that we are doing everything that we can within the budget that we have to support our students and our staff and our families when it comes down to it. So I think we're going to hand it over back to you about our enrollment
Sure.
for the lovely box.
Just to, ignore that block up in the
Sorry.
right-hand corner. Just some more statistics, background on the district. This first one has enrollment by grade. The one takeaway from this slide, I think, is if you look at the line at the bottom, the district, so you can see the total for each class, is that the kind of ups and downs of the sizes of classes. We are a relatively small district, so, from grades, 2 to 3, you go 221 to 177. And then if you look up at grades 10 to 11, 185 to 150. So those are pretty good swings between. So what that means is that the superintendent and her staff have to kind of reallocate teachers at various times in order to accommodate these bubbles, if you will, that go through the district. The next slide has some of the demographics by race. You can see the breakup there, white being the largest, Hispanic being second largest. And then at the bottom, the different programs. I would draw your attention to English language learners, 12.5%, a little above the state average, and then students with disabilities, 21.4%, above the state average. Those are two populations that oftentimes require additional resources and additional support. So that is an additional cost that we have as a district. The next slide gives some projections for enrollment from NESDEC, one of the outside providers who does some projections for us. And you can see some fluctuations over time up to 2028. They're an anticipated increase of a couple of hundred students. So not terribly dramatic, but kind of slow changes over time. And then at the slide at the bottom, next slide here is looking at class sizes along with some of those projections. And you can see on the left-hand side would be the elementary classes, the Cunniff, the Hosmer, the Lowell, the populations in each, the number of classrooms, and then down at the bottom where it says FY20 cap, that's where the class sizes are. So that's one of the areas where we particularly try to, at the primary grades, very much so, try to maintain smaller class sizes. We have guidelines of kindergarten and 1 is 20 students, 2 and 3 is 22 students, and then 4 and 5 is 24 students. And you can see we're maintaining that. And I don't know if they can see the color configuration. You can see some shifting. Some of them, the ones that are slightly shaded, are where some adjustments are being made to accommodate. You'll talk about some additional teachers that are needed in order to accommodate to maintain the class sizes. The next slide is an overview on the budget process. Establishing budget priorities. That's the first bullet there is one where both the school committee and the school department work together to establish those priorities. And then the next 5 bullets are really ones that the administration does with Heidi Perkins and curriculum coordinators and principals, et cetera, developing the budget within in-house, if you will. And then the last 2 bullets are where it comes to the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, and we have a number of meetings where we review it, and then ultimately the school committee approves. And then at the bottom, you can see that all of that is kind of put to a calendar. And we are at June at the very end of the calendar.
Get 2 months off.
Right. So let me go back to
Yep.
Dr. Nelson.
So a little bit back to our district improvement strategy. What's really driving that are 4 strategic objectives. And the first 3 really correspond with our core values of equity, excellence, and community. And we developed budget priorities around those 3 objectives. You just pay attention to strategic objective 4, which is building educationally appropriate, joyful learning environments that support the Watertown Public Schools mission and vision. The town manager spoke about our Building for the Future initiative. Couldn't be more appreciative and excited about the opportunities that Watertown is affording our children. And although we don't have necessarily specific budget on our side about this, this certainly is something that we are preparing for throughout the coming years. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but one of the first steps in the budget process was determining our priorities. And if you take a little bit of time, or if you've read through the book, you'll notice that there are many initiatives that support each of these objectives, and most of them have budgetary implications. But we know that we are committed to these ideas of equity, excellence, and community. So you'll see the examples of the priorities that we set for the budget process. And then when we went into the budget process as well, we had to think about the drivers that were going to impact our budget for FY20. We just talked about the fact that we have some bubbles in our elementary enrollment, and there aren't as many dips as there may have been in the past, so we actually have to add 3 elementary teachers. And at this point in time, we are increasing a class in grade 5 at the Cuniff, a grade 3 teacher at the Hosmer, and a grade 2 teacher at the Lowell. And we budget our incoming staff at Master Step 5 just to ensure that we have a little bit of room if we need to. And at this point in time, we may end up shifting, but we know we need 100% 3 elementary teachers to maintain our class sizes. We did a little bit of a shift for a humanities teacher, which is right now a 0.7 up to a full-time in terms of helping with the enrollment. We're increasing our world language teacher at the middle school from 0.5 to 0.8. Again, this is not just with enrollment, but it's an increase in the number of students in grade 6 that are taking world languages. It used to be more students were taking reading. I think that due to many a lot of the emphasis that we're paying at elementary school in terms of literacy, fewer students are coming out of elementary needing that literacy instruction in grade 6, so we need to offer more world language. And then we're also increasing an ESL teacher at the Hosmer. If you noticed, I think that we highlighted the fact that we're at 12.9% for ELL, and that actually moves us into the category of a high incidence district. And as such, we have a need to increase the FTE for ESL. We did have some salary savings in terms of budgeting in FY19 that we ended up not filling. And also we had 5 special education aides that were not filled due to students moving out of districts or no longer needing to have a one-to-one instructional assistant. So we did have some savings as well. And then in FY19, we had some increases in terms of staffing, primarily due to the savings that we had. I just want to make sure people are aware, as this was part of our level services budget. 2 door monitors at the high school and the middle school. For anyone who has entered our high school and middle school, you know that it's a long journey from the door to the actual office. So this is for safety reasons. We increased the teacher visually impaired from 0.6 to 1.0. We also added 7 part-time kindergarten aide positions. It's interesting because we used to actually have a grant from the state for kindergarten aides. When that grant was cut, we actually cut our kindergarten aides. And I am here to say that if there's ever a classroom that needs an extra set of hands, it's kindergarten. So we're very pleased to have been able to bring back 7 part-time kindergarten aides and then 3 lunch aides at the middle school. So that was all part of the FY19 budget. One of I would say probably the largest budget driver that we have is a $468,000 increase in Minuteman tuition. As you know, we actually are sending, maybe you do or don't know, but next year we'll be sending 65 students to Minuteman. That's actually an increase in the number of students who are attending. But beyond which, for every student, we're now charged a capital fee of $6,202 per student. That is to help for the debt service for Minuteman Regional Vocational Technical High School, which is opening a new building in the fall. And this is a fee that's charged to all non-resident students, so that's us, and other districts as well. And there's also an additional $1,100 increase for special education students, and there's an increase in tuition. So all in all, that's almost a $500,000 increase that's part of our budget and a major budget driver. And then, this year, we were able to purchase or lease, as we know, because we've come to the town council about this, multi-function student activity buses. So that's a 3-year lease, and that is a driver for our FY20 budget. So in terms of the guidance, if with the 5% increase, our budget is $50,441,424. And that's an increase of $2,401,973, which is, again, it's very generous, and certainly we are ensuring that we're using that increase to our best ability. But when it comes down to it, our level services budget, which we just reviewed the drivers in our level services budgets, really pretty much took up that entire 5% increase. It's roughly 4.5%. But that level services budget is the increase of $2,164,266. So that's 90.1% of the total amount that we have allocated for FY20, which left us $237,707 to the delta to try to figure out if there's any additions or increases to programmatic programs within our schools. So we're excited about having that, for sure, but certainly level services is, it's high. So this just kind of goes over the budgetary changes. As we talked about, our level services budget is about 4.51% of that increase, and then we increased that up to 5% with that $237,707, which brings us to the total of $50,441,424. We had additional departmental requests, which we're going to go over in a minute. And I'll talk about the process a little bit, but everybody had requests as to what they thought that they might need to, or what they'd like to add to their programs. We weren't able to fund all of that, but we certainly believe that what we did fund is essential to moving our district forward. So this, again, just goes over the adopted budget in terms of salary and expenses, and I have a more detailed breakdown in the next slide. So this is the district's adopted budget in terms of the different categories. I just want to highlight one thing, that we're in the process of negotiations, and as such, our regular day or our teacher salaries don't reflect any kind of increase yet, because we haven't finished our negotiations. So you'll see a little bit, if you're wondering why that 64% is in the district administration line, that is a set aside, but it's not just for the contract negotiations, it's for variations in terms of lane changes or non-aligned staff, or, there's a variety of different things that are in there, but that is why that looks so much larger than it would in any other year that's not a negotiating year. I just wanted to highlight that for the town council. So this is the salary portion of the budget. It just goes over the budget for each of the, in each of the areas for salary. And then, if I'm just, in case there's questions around the regular day and the student services, we did speak about the fact that we had 2 positions that weren't filled. They were special education positions, and those reallocations that we had shifted that. As you see, it's pretty much almost a swap between student services and regular day. Kindergarten aides, for example, are not student services. They are actually classified as regular day. So it's not that we had a dramatic cut in student services, it's just reallocation and a better way of accounting where the FTE are. And then this is our non-salary portion of the recommended budget. I think it's in keeping with the direction that we're moving in as a district. On the next, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to rush through there, but on the next slide, I think it's a more visual presentation, a representation of the budget. And I think it's important to, once again, highlight the fact that here in Watertown, student services is a large portion of our budget. And of student services, that includes special education, which at this point is 31.7% of our budget. That is up in the top 5 districts in the state. And that is, not just because we have a larger amount of students on ed plans, but we obviously have some schools within our district that have students in them that are part of our Watertown community. But that just is something to highlight, that here in Watertown, our student services portion of the budget is higher than you would find in many communities. And but luckily, I think we're very fortunate that hasn't, we would never ever say that impacts the services that we're able to provide all of our students due to the generosity of the town. This is just an overview of our I'm still on, right?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, just checking.
You're doing great.
Thank you. So this is just an overview of our federal, state, and private grants. Now, not all of this money is used as offsets. Most of it is to the budget, but some of them are supplemental, so that just as added services such as tutoring or RTI interventionists. There's different ways that we do that, but not all of it is a direct offset to the budget. This is one area, just as, if you can see, I know it's pretty small, but the one area that the state has provided as funding is the Foundation Reserve Award, which has traditionally been $250,000, and that's for districts such as ours that have Chapter 766 programs within our town, as well as high special education costs. The state, at this point, is considering a reduction of that to $125,000, so that's not finalized, but it is something that we've been told that's a possibility, but that is, that is something that is meant to help districts like Watertown, and hopefully that will be back to full funding at $250, but it is just a consideration. And then the other thing here, just to mention, and I know that's is talked about in the budget book, but this year, we're not counting on the FY20 circuit breaker in terms of creating our budget. Watertown has gently weaned itself off of using current year circuit breaker, so we'll be offsetting all of FY19. But that gives us the ability that when we have these fluctuations in special education, that we're able to meet those demands. And again, it's highly unpredictable, and I think not just with circuit breaker, but with the Special Education Stabilization Fund, Watertown has done a great job of ensuring that we are not, that we don't jeopardize the services that we provide to all of our students because of the fluctuations in special education. So we're very, very pleased and proud that we are not relying on FY20 circuit breaker to have this budget that we present to you.
I would, if I could just add to that, I mean, if you think historically, that's a really a big change for the department, and as Dr. Galston said, really advantageous, because if you go back 6, 8, 10 years, when we would have kind of budget crises, oftentimes it was because of special education costs, which we weren't able to deal with a change in costs. But now we have this, we are able to have essentially an amount that could cover unexpected costs. So that's a significant change.
So the next slide just is an overview of our revolving funds. Watertown, again, is a community, a school district that has many programs within it that are either fee-based or tuition-based. So we do have a large amount of revolving funds, but I think that we maintain them in a way that our programs are effectively and efficiently run. And we do use some of this as offsets to our budget. And then last but not least, this slide, not last but not least, but almost last but not least, this slide shows the offsets that we take from either the revolving funds or the grants as part of our actual operating budget for FY20. So the next slide is the FY18 per pupil spending comparison. So, a lot of times people talk about the fact that Watertown has high per pupil, our funding is high, $20,008 per pupil. But I go back to what we've been talking about is that Watertown's highly committed to small class sizes, which is really exceptional in the state. We have higher than average special education costs. We have our students who go to Minuteman. We have many drivers within our budget and priorities that we've set that, I think bear out that our per pupil spending is higher than many other communities. And I just think that's a testament to what we're doing within Watertown. We're certainly not the highest, but we certainly we have a healthy expenditure for our schools. And then last but not least, I'm just going to go over the priorities and how it is that we determined how we were going to spend that $237,000 of the delta. So as I said, all of our budget owners and our coordinators put forth what they thought was important, what they thought were important to continuing moving forward as a district. There was a very long list of requests and asks. And then as a team of 32 people, we sat together and spoke with each other and listened to what everybody needed and wanted. And as a group, we decided what our priorities were. So you'll see there's a column that says ranking. So these are the items that rose to the top. And, I think this is the healthiest way to do this so that people don't ever feel like, well, I don't know why they got instructional coaches when I needed something else. No, it was a discussion amongst everybody to ensure that this is what we believe in and people can understand it and justify it. So in terms of what we were able to fund, we talked about the fact that we're adding 2 middle school instructional coaches. We have a very healthy instructional coaching program in our elementary schools, which has just grown over the last 2 years. Again, thanks to the generosity of the town. We have 2 elementary literacy and 2 elementary math coaches, and now we're expanding that to 1 STEM coach at the middle school and then 1 literacy coach at the middle school / humanities. But this is, I think, and you can talk to a lot of people about coaching, but I think that this is the one way that we really move forward in terms of instructional practice and meeting the needs of all students, because this is somebody that's in buildings 180 days, not just a one-day, training or a couple of hours after school. This is ongoing all the time to support teachers when they need help or they have questions or they don't know how to meet a particular student's needs. So we believe that this is foundational for our success. The next item is responsive classroom training. That's just continuing the training of our social emotional learning curriculum. We were able to offset a little bit in terms of a retirement and reallocating that primarily to a social worker for the Lowell and the middle school. We had to increase our FLES rollout, as we just talked about. Right now we have foreign language in elementary school and kindergarten in grades 1 and 2, and we'll be rolling into grades 3. 1.5 teacher will get us there, which is fantastic. And then I just mentioned the social worker. And then just generally, it's technology purchases to support technology in our classrooms. And then the last item is a $50,000 budget item that will help us to better plan for curriculum adoption on a cycle. So that is the last funded item that was requested. And then the last 2 pages just talk about some of the items that were requested that weren't funded. Due to the fact that we had level services and then that delta. But I would say that, as we work towards the end of the year, if there's anything that we're able to, due to the savings that we might have in our FY19 budget to purchase, that is what we're trying to do. So there are items here that will be part of our school next year. It just all depends on where we land at the end of FY19. So that is the budget presentation for the school department, and any of us are more than happy to answer questions that you have about this proposed budget.
Thank you very much. Questions from the council? Councilor Feltner.
Thank you very much. Could you talk a little bit about, so you're saying elementary technology, there is some funding this fiscal year, but you're looking out, because obviously it's a top ranking there for future years, what that might look like? I don't know if you've figured that out yet, or?
Sure. So a couple of thoughts on that is within the budget, within the actual operating budget, there's money set aside for technology. So replacement of Chromebooks, et cetera. This is actually additional items to support the elementary program, whether it be interactive projectors or iPads for kindergarten and first grade. They're not essential to, we will be able to have school without them, but they certainly would help to support that. But I think that, as I mentioned before, we're pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to fund some of that through FY19, and actually are in the process of doing that. But we would not have left something off if we felt that it was essential for the operation of the school. But there is embedded in the budget technology funds to support the essential technology in the elementary schools. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm a little curious. It's driven by curriculum or teachers, or what you're hearing in your deliberations of ranking and the needs being stated?
So in terms of it's driven by the increase, well, for example, the increase of certain technology platforms that we're using. So, for example, the iPads for K1 and 2, we have them currently, but the iReady assessment, which we talked a little bit about, has also online instruction. Kindergartners and students in grades 1 and 2 do better on an iPad where they can manipulate on a touchscreen. They can use the laptops or the Chromebooks, but it's just easier. So I think that ask is driven from that. The interactive projectors are something that we have had in certain grade levels, but not in all grade levels. So, you know, an interactive projector is wonderful for, you know, really getting into the material, and when you see teachers using them that really love them and use them well, I mean, it's pretty fantastic, and the kids get to interact with them. But again, you know, that's just driven by just a different representation of curriculum for the students. But if we don't end up with it, then it's not, teachers have been teaching with whiteboards and projectors for a long time, but this would really just enhance, it's not essential to the curriculum.
We had iPads at one school from the PTO.
Yep.
Just squaring up.
Right, so, and due to the as what Ms. Perkins just said, due to the generosity of our PTOs, sometimes fully well-intentioned and excellent, they'll buy things for schools, but then we end up with, you know, some schools having something and other schools not. And so that was another one, thank you, that was another one of the reasons for that.
Thank you.
Counselor Palumbo.
Thank you. Just thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. I also just want to make a general comment that I remember your presentation when we were reviewing the last vote on the budget for some additional, for monies for the new schools. You said, I was impressed by your statement, which, with all the excitement about the new schools, you reminded us that it's really what takes place in those schools that is important, and so I just wanted to appreciate that. I just would like to know, given what the 5% increase that the town manager allocates, how much of that $2.4 million is for, and it might, I'm sure it's in here, I just didn't locate it quickly, but how much of that $2.4 million is for increases in staff salaries?
Do you have a good rough estimate off the top?
Because we haven't negotiated any of our contracts right now, that's in the set aside that Dr. Galton mentioned. And because we're in negotiations, normally we wouldn't put that out for all the unions to hear at this time, but there is a set aside, and we don't know how much of that set aside will be used when we finish the negotiations. So I don't know if that answers sort of.
Well, I would just say, you know, the 90% for the level services budget,
Yeah.
I mean, most of that is personnel costs.
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah,
So
we don't have an exact figure for that because, as Heidi's saying, we don't have salaries. You know, any other year, we would be able to say, you know, next year, our teachers will get a 2% increase or
Right.
something like that. We don't know what they're going to get next year because we're still negotiating that. So we can't give a specific dollar amount, but of that 90%, most of it's personnel.
Yeah.
So the other improvements, the other pieces of the budget that call for, or was it not your drivers, but excuse me. So the other pieces of the recommendations in terms of spending, which was the big one that you said caught, that was such a large one, was almost $50,000, $500,000.
Oh, Minuteman.
Minuteman. Right?
That's
So
listed
if we're
as a
talking
driver.
about, is that part of the level service?
Yes,
So we're talking about an increase of almost $500,000 in one item, and the rest of it, a significant amount set aside for potential salary increases. So how much did you actually have to play with to do anything new with, is what?
so the $237,000.
That was it? That
Yes.
was it, what you had?
For new,
Okay.
brand new. I think, unlike maybe.
Yeah, excuse me.
No, go
I
ahead.
think I understand that in any budget that you sort of drop some things and you add some new things.
Right.
And kind of work it around as best you could, but in terms of money that was allowed to be used for improving new programming, you're talking about $287,000? Was that?
237.
What?
37.
$237,000. Is that what was available?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I would just, can I just add
Oh,
something?
please.
Well,
I'm
I
sorry, I
think
didn't
it's-
mean to interrupt you, but.
No. I think that when you think of the 237, that's, you know, increases to programs or increases to, or help to support initiatives. But within this budget, I mean, we have a lot of money set aside for professional development, for already existing coaching. I mean, for curriculum. I mean, I must admit, in Watertown, we're very well resourced. So, I think that the 237, what we got in terms of the coaching is fantastic. But even within the budgets, the principals in the level services budget made adjustments if they felt that, this is going to be a big year for, trying to think what's a good example. Can't think off the top of my head, but they don't need as many social studies texts because they needed to focus more on math. So they'll make adjustments within their actual budgets. So, I think we're making improvements even within the level services budget. So we do make decisions
Within it.
to prioritize.
Mayor? So I'm just thinking a little bit ahead. There's been so much excitement, and rightly so, on the new schools.
Yes.
And in the next 3 years, what that gets rolled out, 3.5 years, or 3 years. And I noticed that there's a sort of commitment on a part of the town manager and the town to increase the budget for 5% again over the next couple of years. I'm just wondering if, maybe it's too early to start thinking about it, but when you think about a new school and new programs, that I can't imagine that it's going to be tough to continue to do the new programming in a new school with only a 5% increase, and to meet the service level, and also do the new stuff that the school provides you the opportunity to do, right? I'm guessing. So I'm just wondering if we're thinking a little bit ahead around the fact that going to have new facilities that provide the opportunity for new programming, new opportunities of learning. I mean, I don't know all the catchwords, but I've been picking it up long enough now, that there's going to be needs for resources to do that. And no matter how much you change to meet population needs or change to meet particular school needs, there's going to be need to think about that. So I'm just putting that out there as something to think about for the future, that we are going to have wonderful schools, buildings that provide us new opportunities for learning.
Absolutely.
That may require new additional staff, additional programs to utilize those new facilities, and that we need to think about what that means. And I'll get off the soapbox and just ask you one quick question.
And, can I answer?
And then you
a little
could
bit
come
of that
back
too?
with
Okay,
it.
because I have a few thoughts.
Okay.
So,
I've never heard of budget managers. Are they, so who is the position?
principals,
Principals.
directors.
Okay, that's all. I was just trying to think of
Yeah,
who
if
your
you're
budget
a
managers
principal of a
were.
building or a director of a program, I mean, Lori, if she was still with us, would have been one of those budget managers, but, so just on that thought, interestingly, we had a presentation last night at the school committee meeting about kind of looking at the future or redesign of the school. So
High school.
The high school, right. So one thing that we will not do, which I can guarantee you, is wait until we open a new high school to determine what we're going to do inside of it. So we're starting that process right now. And I hear what you're saying about resources to support that. I think the most important thing is figuring out how we're going to teach in this new building. And that work is going to, happen from now all the way through the opening of the school. And just a minor detail is, part of any new building is, building the building. You're right about staffing, but whether it's technology or equipment or things like that, that's all part of the building process, fortunately. So that will hopefully be taken care of through that larger appropriation for building the building. But yes, who knows at that moment in time if we end up with different staffing options, but we will try to anticipate and figure out how we work within the confines to make the most of our new building.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. So thank you for this. Two things of note. First of all, we've come a long way with budgeting, and I do want to thank you for what appears to be a very well thought out, innovative budget. Despite two things. One, the first is as you mentioned, this is the first budget that has not relied on approximately $2 million worth of circuit breaker funding to fund the current year programs. So that's pretty astounding. And I think that, you know, we've, in past 10 years ago, we struggled greatly with wild fluctuations in special ed costs, which led us to create the Special Ed Stabilization Fund, which, you know, knock on wood, since we created that, we actually haven't had any dramatic cost overruns. So, but the fact you were able to put together the fiscal year 20 budget without relying on funding part of that with the circuit breaker is astounding, and I think that.
Sorry, excuse me.
Just to clarify, we do rely on 1 year of circuit breaker in every budget as an offset. What was happening in the past was, and so the way circuit breaker works is whatever the expenses were for FY '18, we receive a portion of that refunded to us in '19. In the past, you would have to guess sort of what your expenses would be through all of '18, you know, 6 months prior when you're doing the budget, and then see what the state decides the following September to reimburse as a rate. So you're making an estimate on not only your special ed out-of-district costs for the year, then you're making an estimate of what the state might do in their budget, which is very risky. So many districts, and they're envious, and many of them are trying to do the same thing that's been done here, is weaning off a little bit at a time over the last couple of years, so that whatever we know in September of this year, we're going to receive over the 4 quarters, that is the exact amount budgeted as the offset for next year. So what it did was take away the risk. So we're still always relying on 1 year of revenue, and you only have 1 year to use it, so we can't do anything otherwise. Usually in the 4th quarter, there might be a little bit of a bump. The state looks at what's sort of left over in that fund, and we might get a little bit of extra money. So that's just additional. If that does happen, we get that extra money in the next year that's not budgeted. But essentially, the $2 million or so, you know, you can count on that. It takes away the risk of planning for revenue for next year that we don't even know if we're going to get. So it's very conservative, and it's a good move, and I'm just happy that it was started over the last couple of years, and we were able to finish it this year. So I just wanted to clarify.
And we are carrying forward some unspent money from the previous fiscal year, the reimbursement to use in the next fiscal year, correct?
All the revenue that we receive this year is what we'll use next year.
So we're always a year behind.
We only have 12 months to use it up.
So, right, but we know, that's why we know exactly what.
Yes, so the risk of that now has disappeared.
Anyway, excellent. The other thing is, you know, within the 5%, the $468,000 increase in the Minuteman, of course, $403,000 of that is the first year of this capital cost,
Yes.
right? So again, that's a big hit, obviously, to absorb $400,000 of new expenses in 1 year, but you're able to do it. And of course, the good news is that when you're putting together the fiscal year 21 budget, that's not going to be a new expense. It'll be, so as Council Palumbo was mentioning about, you know, you had $200,000, $237,000 for new initiatives. That $403,000 is going to be available for other new initiatives next fiscal year. So those are two things. And then just one last thing is we get the compensation sheets finally usually, and I was just looking at something what seemed odd about it. It seemed like the first column is missing, and because I said, you know, the sorting of the things, I realize it's alphabetical by last name, but the names are actually missing from the compensation sheet. So it'd be really helpful, and I know this is your first year here, but it'd be great if you could resubmit these with the actual names on them, the very first column.
So last year, the employee names were not submitted. I looked at last year's submission, and they were not on there, so you want them added?
That is typically, yes.
Okay, I just followed what I saw was submitted
and last year that was a problem also.
Okay, I wasn't aware. Sorry about that. I will resubmit.
So typically, and if you look at, you know, if you look at this, or if you look at previous years, and John Ports will agree that this has been an ongoing problem.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And it would just be nice if these had been in this book. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Mr. President, the council's commented about the names. There was a decision, Ms. Perkins is right, last year we did not include the names, and I believe that the decision was, the reason was that even though all salaries are public, is that there's a lot of movement from year in and year out. And depending upon when that old thing that's in this teacher's contract that we didn't have to use anymore for, at least we haven't used for recent things, is the pink slips that used to have to go out by April 15th. We kind of, I thought we had agreed among us that we didn't have to do the names, but if we want to include the names, we can include the names.
Tom, I would suggest that what we do is a very public process, and.
I agree.
And this is very public, where I can look and see how much Tom Tracy's making, or I can look and see how much Marilyn Pronovo's making. We should be able to tell our constituents the same thing. So we would.
Mr. President, I agree. I just maybe just leave it at that last year, we also didn't do this. And Ms. Perkins did ask me, and I don't want.
No, we're not, we would just respectfully request that we get a comp sheet with the names attached to it. Any other questions? Councilor Donato.
Thank you, Mr. President. Watertown News ran a story last week on our vote to fund the $12 million for the architecture services for the 3 elementary schools, and a couple people commented to the story, and maybe for people who haven't been following it as closely as others, could you just maybe speak to the decision as to why first of all, I want to say it's a very exciting time for the school systems, but why we're trying to tackle the 3 elementary school systems all within the confines of Prop 2.5, and then why the high school is going on a separate track for the MSBA funding. There seemed to be, just on some of the comments I read, maybe some confusion as to why that was the
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
Great.
So I can give you a fairly, there's a fairly obvious answer. MSBA will fund one project. So if we were to go to MSBA for a project, and it was an elementary school that might cost, $50 million, you're going to get MSBA funding for that. And then you're still left with 4 schools that 3, and maybe 4 later, that you have to tackle. So strategically, you pick the school that's going to help you the most in terms of MSBA funding, and that would be the high school. There's a lot of other reasons as well. I think doing 3, and not so much about the which one, but having 3 elementary schools at once, provides the equal opportunity for all of our elementary students. So there isn't one school that's beautifully renovated and the other 2 are not. So being able to do all 3 at once, we would never be able to do that through MSBA. You'd be constantly trying to get through. So it's very good planning to do it that way. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense. I got the sense that maybe there was this kind of lingering question
Right.
in town that some people didn't think had been answered. So I think that was a very concise answer, and I would imagine maybe Charlie might run that in his story about this budget hearing, and I think that would help a lot of people.
I would add to that, Mr. Counselor, that if you look back at the process, the planning process that the school department's done over the last 5 years, there've been a couple of times when we've had different kind of analyses done of the buildings, and one going back probably 3 or 4 years, clearly focused on the high school as the greatest need as a building. So there's that kind of physical component there too. And I think communities often pick high schools to go to the MSBA because it is the kind of largest investment in the community, and you really have to, it's a community project, if you will, because it's going to be, the support of the community is really critical, all the community, and so high schools are often identified as, that speaks for the whole community.
And
Arlington's doing theirs, Belmont, Waltham, all 3 of them are just a little bit ahead of us, and they're all doing their high schools through the MSBA.
And then by kind of going under that schedule, when the high school is eventually done, if at that point in time the middle school needs to be addressed, that would be a potential project that could go in from the MSBA.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councilor Falcoff.
Thanks. I feel like people are asking some good macro questions, and I have a tiny micro question. On the page about budget offsets, something just leapt out at me, which was a private donation for teachers for $40,000. I wonder if you could explain that.
Yeah, that's the Watertown Cable Access Television. They get a grant from the cable companies to spend as they see fit, and they have supported a teacher at our high school who does television broadcast, which is one of the most enrolled in technical programs that we have at the high school. So without that grant funding from WCATV, that would be very challenging for us to have that program.
Thank you. For next year, it might be helpful to just identify
Sure,
the
yes.
source, because that private donation sounded kind of
Yeah.
secret.
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely. No, we're
Thanks.
very, very excited about WCATV's support of the schools.
Councilor Feltner.
Thank you. One last question. Could you give some examples under the recommended budget non-salary portion, extracurricular, just what that includes, and is that outside of, full, regular day, or just to get a sense of what that's about?
Yeah, so, I mean, as the name sounds, extracurricular is outside, extracurricular, so outside, advisorships, et cetera. It's a very small portion of the budget, but certainly it's supporting the extensions of learning outside, so.
I was just trying to get a sense of how it ties into the cost center, so, but we can talk offline, too.
Sure.
I know it's very small.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we always say we educate the whole child, and
Right.
that's athletics, extracurriculars, all the programs, clubs, right, that's
Yeah, I was
all
wondering
part
if
of
it's-
educational programming, which I think brings a lot of kids to school. So that's just one of those examples.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Woodland.
Thank you for your presentation. Something I was curious about is, if I'm remembering correct, the level service from last year was 4.1, somewhere around there, and the year before was 3.9, 3.89, or something to that effect. I'm looking at what the priorities are going to be or that weren't funded this year. We're coming to around 410, as Councilor Petrelli noted, that 400 of that could become available next year just by the reduction of capital to Minuteman. But there's always going to be new priorities. Is there some sort of level, as it relates to the level service, if you're anticipating 5% every year, and is there some sort of goal that you have of maybe having level service be at, 3.5%? So in that way, you're always doing 1.5% towards these new goals and new programs. Is there some sort of target that you're trying to reach over the long term?
You can't, unfortunately. Wouldn't that be, but there's such fluctuation that would be very hard to do. I can tell you that there's always a little bit of a different approach to budgeting. And I think that the previous assistant superintendent or business managers might have had a different way to consider level services. So this year, under Ms. Perkins, we focused on level service, meaning anything that we needed to actually run the schools. So, for example, the previous year, when we had the increase of a grade 2 teacher at the Hosmer, that was on the priority list. But honestly, we couldn't have had grade 2 at the Hosmer without that teacher. So this year, those 3 elementary teachers, for example, went into level services. So I think that number increased more than, it would have only based on a different approach to level services. So, I think that's more realistic, because if we didn't have that in there, then we wouldn't be able to run our programs. But that fluctuates, and next year it might be back down, but that would only be due to the fact that maybe we have a bubble that exits and we're able to reduce, but, yeah.
If I could add on, so level services, as you saw with our English language learner population becoming now high incidence, the amount of students, the increase of the bubble that we mentioned, the 0.5 FTE at the middle school, the increase in the special ed out-of-district costs. So while it's not level funded or just a 2% increase or whatever it might be for most other town departments, that is more predictable based on inflation and the COLA on the contracts, because we're dealing with people, that's our business, is people, the fluctuation in their needs and how many special ed students and the severity of their disabilities and the costs of out-of-district tuition, the amount of ELL students. So within our population, the needs within the population and the micro-populations, that's level service, that we're giving the same things this year, next year, that we're giving to the kids this year, but we can't control what those costs are for those same things, depending on the populations within our school population. So if that explains more, I don't know.
And I guess the only reason I bring it up is because I just want folks, I guess at home, to understand that that answer makes a lot of sense with the fluctuations and being hard to predict. Someone might be looking at this and saying, oh, going up 5% isn't sustainable in the Prop 2.5 environment. And Watertown may be experiencing unparalleled growth right now that allows the 5% every year, but that's not going to be forever. So that's reassuring to me and the folks at home to know that we are looking at that long term, and that this fluctuation is really based on a lot of solid budget practices, and that if something were to happen and that 5% was not possible, that we'd have room to make sure that we could still accommodate the educational needs of the kids. Something else I wanted to ask a question about was, we know those rankings that come out every year, like they rank every school in Massachusetts, they rank every school in the country. I don't give a particularly large amount of weight to those, because I don't think they incorporate a lot of really important factors. I was just curious what your thoughts are. How much weight you give those, how much weight you think the public should give those. If I'm standing up here saying I'm dedicating 5% every year, but we have a certain rating that someone else, might want to see higher, why is it good or bad?
I can
did
start.
some, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the U.S. News and World Report came out with that report, and so they ranked us kind of within Massachusetts and then nationwide as well. I mean, we look at those things or we hear about them, we'll put it that way. The U.S. News and World Report in particular was rather narrow in what it used. It required a fair amount on AP testing, which is not a bad thing. I mean, AP is an important one, but they kind of defined it in a rather narrow way. They only looked at seniors. They didn't look at other students. That's my understanding of it. I tried to dig into the methodology a little bit, and I think it was a little bit of an unusual way of defining it. But, in terms of how much credit we give or kind of relevance we give to those, I think something like that, much less so. I think, MCAS, we look at. That happens every year. We always have a report in the fall about the testing that took place in the spring. And so I think MCAS provides the kind of information that can be more useful, but even that, you don't want to let that be the only driver. And so one of the things that superintendent introduced was some formative assessments, iReady being the best example of giving that 3 times a year. And by a formative assessment, the teacher gets the results essentially right away, and they can turn around and use it to improve instructional practices. MCAS is given in the spring. You get the results 5 months later. The students have moved on to another grade. I mean, you can still look at things like, are we aligned up with the curriculum and things like that, but it's not as helpful as a formative assessment that gives feedback right away to teachers. And I think we're putting a lot of emphasis on that this year. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Of course, I always like to add.
Go ahead.
I think the other important thing to recognize is that in terms of our internal, if we look at comparing ourselves to our growth, we had a pretty spectacular year at the high school level in terms of meeting our targets based upon our previous year's performance. We met targets, which I think there was roughly 15% of high schools did that. So, when you look at these, one way to describe a school just doesn't take into account all of the facets that make our high school excellent. And, the diversity is one of the most important attributes that I think that leads to the success of our students. They don't talk about that when they come out with these rankings, but we have data that indicates that we're meeting the needs of all of our students and we're doing very well. And we're going to continue to do so moving forward. And we also had similar strength in our elementary programs. So we're looking forward to coming up with an internal metric that we can share with the community that kind of monitors the progress that we're making and keeps us accountable to ourselves. And I think that's really important, so.
One last one. And I agree completely. I mean, I went to Lowell Middle and High School and loved my experience.
Yes.
In Watertown schools. I guess the state and municipal governments are they're taking note of a population that's going to be retiring over the next few years. And everyone across the state is looking at, I think one of the department heads called it succession planning, and making sure that with the wave of retirements, there's going to be new folks to come in, very great qualified folks to fill that gap of folks that are going to be leaving. And I was wondering if you guys had looked at that and how much of a concern that is right now.
So, honestly, we haven't thought about the succession planning moving forward. Right now, when all is said and done, we're in a very favorable place in terms of the job market for teachers. We haven't had a relative shortage. I mean, there have been years where it's been really tough to find teachers. I think that maybe there's, and I hear what you're saying, but we're not as concerned. There was a wave of retirements, 12 years ago that really hit schools very hard. We're not anticipating that same level that we had back in 2001 and 2. But I do think that what we're doing for succession is providing an excellent environment for teachers, making sure that they are happy in their jobs, that they're well-resourced, that they're supported. And so I think a lot of what you're seeing here, if I'm a teacher and I think, oh my gosh, I'm going to come to Watertown, I mean, the pay is pretty, competitive. But beyond that, I'm going to get coached, I'm going to get strong PD, I'm going to get, support in terms of benefits. I mean, there's all these things that make for a happy educator. And I think that that's how you make sure that you're in a position to be competitive if there's a shortage. So that's.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? I just want to say thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your presentation. And I just want to go back to something the manager touched on early. And we've developed 2 fiscal year 20 budget policy guidelines that have been in place for a while. And I think they're working perfectly. And I appreciate you working with the manager and the council in making these things come to fruition, because it's important for our students. So I want to thank you all for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I get a motion to continue this meeting to Tuesday, May 28th at approximately 8 p.m.?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.